This legend is this shopkeeper's baby was born beyond the condo by Degatos. Like, so the link to the video will be the description below. Go and check them out. So let's into this reaction in 3, 2, 1.
The fluorescent lights of Miller's corner store flickered at 2:47 a.m. when Felix Miller felt the first contraction rip through his abdomen like lightning. The store was empty except for him and the hum of refrigerators. His water broke between the candy aisle and the lottery ticket display, pooling on the linoleum floor he'd mopped just 3 hours earlier. Felix gripped the counter, his pregnant belly tight as a drum,
Uh-oh.
and realized with terrifying clarity that he was completely alone, and his baby was coming right now, behind the
Yeah.
register where he'd spent every night for the past 8 months hiding the impossible truth of what his body had become. Felix Miller had worked the graveyard shift at his family's corner store in Detroit for 11 years. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 7 days a week, he was the sole guardian of Miller's corner store,
Yeah.
a dim-lit sanctuary of chips, cigarettes, energy drinks, and desperation that served the insomniacs, the night workers, the addicts, and the lost souls who needed somewhere to exist when the rest of the world was sleeping. At 34, Felix had made peace with his life. His parents had owned the store for 40 years before retiring to Florida, leaving it to Felix with the unspoken
We told you, Florida.
understanding that he'd never amount to anything more than this. Manning a register, restocking shelves, watching the same rotating cast of broken people shuffle through his door night after night. Felix was transgender, though he rarely thought about it anymore. He'd transitioned at 22, a lifetime ago it seemed. Testosterone had deepened his voice and squared his jaw. Top surgery at 25 had given him a flat chest. He'd legally changed his name from Felicia to Felix, and for 12 years, he'd simply been a man. Unremarkable, invisible, exactly what he wanted. He'd never had bottom surgery. The cost was prohibitive, and honestly, Felix had never felt the need. His
Wow.
external presentation was masculine enough that nobody questioned him. The testosterone had stopped his menstrual cycle within months.
Really?
The organs inside him, uterus, ovaries, became irrelevant, dormant, forgotten. Until 8 months ago, when everything changed. It had started with exhaustion so profound that Felix could barely
Yeah.
stand during his shifts. Then nausea that made the smell of hot dogs from the roller grill unbearable. His belly began to swell, firm and round beneath his work shirt. Felix assumed the worst: cancer, a tumor, something killing him from the inside. The ER visit at Detroit General had been humiliating. The doctor, a tired woman in her 50s, had done an ultrasound and gone completely silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured, like she was defusing a bomb. "Mr. Miller, you're approximately 14 weeks pregnant." The words made no sense. Felix had been on
14 weeks pregnant.
testosterone for 12 years. He hadn't had a period in over a decade. He'd been intimate with exactly one person in the past year. Marcus, a regular customer who came in every night at 1 a.m. for coffee and conversation that had, 3 times, turned into something more in Felix's tiny apartment above the store. But pregnancy? Impossible. Except it wasn't.
Yeah.
The doctor explained in clinical terms that Felix barely absorbed. Testosterone wasn't birth control, rare but possible ovulation, dormant system reactivating, viable pregnancy despite years of hormone therapy. Marcus had disappeared 2 months earlier, quit his job, moved out of state, no forwarding information. Felix was alone with this impossible reality growing inside him. The doctor had given him options. Termination was still possible at 14 weeks. Adoption after birth. Resources for people in difficult situations. Felix had walked out of the hospital in a daze and returned to the
Really?
store for his shift. He stood behind the counter, his hand on his belly where something was somehow alive, and made a decision that surprised him. He wanted this baby. Not because he'd planned it. Not because the circumstances
You wanted the baby? You wanted to keep it?
were right. But because for the first time in 11 years of night shifts and fluorescent lights and numbness, Felix felt something other than resignation. He felt purpose. The next 6 months were an exercise in concealment and survival. Felix told no one. His parents called once a month from Florida, and he kept the conversations short, never video chatting. He had no friends to speak of. The night shift had isolated him from normal human connections years ago. The customers never noticed. To them, Felix was furniture, a face behind bulletproof glass, a hand that took money and
Yeah.
gave change. If his belly grew round beneath his increasingly oversized hoodies, if his face took on the exhausted glow of pregnancy, if he moved more slowly between aisles, nobody cared enough to comment. Felix worked through morning sickness, vomiting in the tiny bathroom
Wow.
between customers.
Yeah, that's a big bump.
He worked through the exhaustion that made him lean against the counter to stay upright. He worked through the back pain, the swollen ankles, the bizarre cravings that made him eat pickles straight from the jar at 3 a.m. The
Really?
baby moved inside him, and Felix would place his hand on his belly
Oh.
during the quiet hours, feeling the kicks and rolls of the life he was carrying. He talked to the baby sometimes, in whispers when the store was empty, told the baby about the people who came through, the nurse who bought coffee at
Oh.
4 a.m. before her shift, the college student who studied at the back table, the old man who came in at midnight just to have someone to talk to. Felix bought baby supplies in small increments, hiding them in the storage room. Diapers, bottles, tiny clothes that seemed impossible small. He'd deliver at the hospital when the time came. He
Yeah.
figured. When labor started, he'd close the store, drive himself to Detroit General, and deal with whatever happened. That had been the plan. But plans, Felix learned, meant nothing when your
Yeah.
body decided otherwise. The contractions started at 2:34 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. Felix had felt off all evening, a low ache in his back, a pressure in his pelvis that made walking difficult. But he'd worked through worse.
Yeah.
The store had to stay open. He was 5 days from his due date. Just 5 more days, and he could take off the week he'd planned. The first real contraction doubled him over beside the candy rack.
Wow.
Pain exploded through his lower back and abdomen, so intense his vision blurred. Felix gripped the shelf, breathing through clenched teeth, and waited for it to pass. It did, after 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Felix straightened slowly, his hand on his belly. Braxton Hicks, probably. False labor. He'd read about this. The second contraction came 13 minutes later, while Felix was restocking cigarettes behind the counter. This one brought him to his knees, and he barely caught himself on the register. When he stood, there was wetness running
Oh. It was a book.
down his legs. His water had broken, soaking through his jeans and pooling on the floor. Felix stared at the puddle, his mind racing. The hospital was 15 minutes away. He could close the store, get in his car, drive. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. The third contraction hit before he could dial.
Uh-oh.
This one was different,
Yeah.
stronger, urgent, accompanied by pressure so intense Felix knew with sudden, terrifying certainty that there was no time. No hospital. No doctors. His baby was coming now, in this
Yeah.
fluorescent-lit store that smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, and he was completely alone. Felix locked the front door and flipped the closed sign with fumbling hands. He couldn't stand anymore. His body was demanding he get down, get horizontal. He grabbed towels from the storage room, his movements clumsy and panicked between contractions that were coming every 5 minutes now. Behind the counter, in the narrow space where he'd spent 11 years of his life,
Oh.
Felix spread the towels on the floor. He stripped off his soaked jeans, his body shaking from pain and fear and adrenaline. He'd watched videos, read articles, tried to prepare for birth, but nothing prepared you for this reality, this primal takeover of your body. The contractions were continuous now,
Yeah.
each one building on the last, giving him no time to breathe or think. Felix's body knew what to do even if his mind was screaming in panic. The pressure built and built until he couldn't fight it anymore. He bore down, pushing with everything he had, his voice echoing off the
Continuing.
store's walls in grunts and cries he couldn't control. Time became meaningless.
Yeah.
There was only pain and pressure and the desperate animal need to push this baby out of his body. Felix braced his feet against the counter base, his back against the wall, and pushed through contractions that felt like his body was being torn apart. He felt the baby crowning, a burning, stretching sensation that made him scream. One more push, his body demanded. Just one more. Felix gathered what remained
Oh.
of his strength and pushed with everything he had left. The baby slipped out in a rush of fluid and relief so profound Felix sobbed. He reached down with shaking hands and lifted the slippery, wailing infant onto his chest. A girl. He had a daughter. She was purple and covered in vernix and screaming with impressive lung capacity. And she was the most beautiful thing Felix had ever seen.
Oh.
He held her against his bare chest, both of them crying now, and wrapped a towel around her tiny body. The placenta came minutes later, and Felix dealt with it as best he could with towels and trembling hands. He was bleeding. He didn't know if it was normal or dangerous. His body was in shock, but his daughter was breathing, crying, alive against his chest. Felix sat there on the floor behind the counter, his newborn daughter in his arms, and laughed through his tears. He'd done it. Somehow. Impossibly, he'd done it alone. The
Mm.
pounding on the door came at 5:47 a.m. Felix, still on the floor with his daughter sleeping on his chest, called out weakly. It was Mrs. Chun, the elderly woman who came every morning at 5:45 for her lottery tickets and newspaper. She found him there, Felix, bare from the waist down, covered in blood and birth fluids, holding an hours-old baby behind the counter of Miller's corner store. Mrs. Chun, bless her, didn't scream or judge. She called 911, then sat beside Felix and held his hand while they waited for the ambulance. The paramedics arrived, and the questions came. How long ago? Any complications? Was he alone? But Felix barely heard them. He was focused on his daughter's face, memorizing her
Yeah.
features as they loaded him into the ambulance. At the hospital, doctors checked them both. Felix was severely depleted, needed fluids and monitoring, but would survive. His daughter was perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, healthy lungs, all 10 fingers and toes. A social worker came, asking careful questions about his situation. Was he capable of caring for an infant? Did he have support? What were his plans? Felix looked down at his daughter, now clean and swaddled, sleeping in his arms. Her name is Hope, he said quietly. And yes, I can take care of her. I've been taking care of things on my own for a long time.
Oh,
Felix
oh.
closed Miller's corner store for 2 weeks, the first time it had been closed in 43 years. His parents, shocked by the news of their grandchild, flew back from Florida. There were difficult conversations about Felix's transition, about the pregnancy he'd hidden, about his life they'd never really understood. But when they met
Mm.
Hope, when they saw Felix as a father,
Oh, oh.
something softened. Understanding came slowly, but it came. Felix reopened the store with new hours, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., no more graveyard shifts. He installed a playpen behind the counter and brought Hope with him, her bassinet beside the register where she'd been born. The customers noticed the change. Felix smiled now, engaged in conversations, seemed present in a way he never had before. And when they asked about the baby, Felix told them the truth, or enough of it. She's mine. Born right here behind this counter. Sometimes life happens in the places you least expect it.
True.
Today, Hope is 6 months old. She takes her naps in the same spot where she entered the world, behind the counter of Miller's corner store. Felix is still a man, still Felix, but also now a father in ways he never imagined. The
Yeah.
night he gave birth alone behind that counter taught him something. We're stronger than we believe, braver
True.
than we know, and capable of surviving impossible moments when love demands it.
Yeah.
So here's the question. What would you do if your moment came in the most unlikely place, with no help, no plan, just you and the life depending on you? Drop your thoughts below. Because sometimes
Um.
our greatest transformations happen not in hospitals or homes, but in fluorescent lit corner stores at 3 a.m., when
True.
we're completely alone and completely
Yeah.
capable of miracles.
True. I think I will do that something. Yeah. There was this shopkeeper's baby was born beyond the condo, but that got tossed. The link to the video will be the description below. Go and check them out. And drop a like if you like, and comment below if you want to see more reaction like this one. And subscribe if you're new, and click the bell so you can be notified for a upload in what. Bye. Wow.